man in a gas mask pushing a stroller out of the contaminated zone. What was in it? You'll be shocked to find out. A metal claw so radioactive it can deliver a lethal dose in minutes, vegetables dumped in landfills across Europe, and boats rotting along the Pripyat River. These are more disturbing photos taken inside Chernobyl after the disaster. This image may not look all that striking at first, but there's an interesting backstory here. Months after the disaster, the Soviets wanted a final gesture to show that the cleanup on the roof of reactor number 3 was done. So they ordered 3 men to climb the chimney beside the destroyed reactor and plant a red flag on the top of it. The only way up was a 25-story spiral staircase. Everyone involved knew the radiation up there was still pretty high. Helicopter crews had already tried twice and had to turn back, so the job fell to 3 liquidators. Radiation specialist Alexander Yurchenko, who carried the flagpole, Valery Starodomov, who held the flag, and Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Sotnikov, who handled the radio and kept track of the time. They were told the whole thing needed to be wrapped up in 9 minutes. Any longer, and the dose they'd absorb would be dangerously high. The men made the climb, reached the top, and got the flag secured over the ruins of the reactor that had blown apart just months earlier. Then they came back down the same narrow staircase, knowing they just stood in one of the most radioactive spots on the planet. Once it was done, what did they get in return? A very Soviet reward. They each got a bottle of Pepsi, which was considered a rare treat at the time, and were given a single day off before returning to work. This is a pretty haunting image, even without context. A guy in a gas mask pushing a stroller. What's the story behind this one? Well, there's not a lot of detail to dive into, but it is exactly what it looks like. A liquidator wearing a gas mask and protective suit pushing a baby in a carriage. The child was found in an abandoned house in Tetsenki while the worker was measuring radiation during the cleanup. The village had been emptied after the disaster, and some people, like this infant, were somehow left behind. Workers had to go through deserted homes, streets, and villages, checking for radiation and making sure no one was still inside. In this case, someone was. This photo is from June of 1986. It's a Swedish farmer wearing a gas mask and a protective suit shoveling feed. Nothing about the scene looks all that dramatic at first glance, aside from, of course, him looking like he's cleaning up a toxic spill, which he basically was. The feed was contaminated by the radioactive cloud that drifted out of Chernobyl. He's not a scientist, he's not a cleanup worker, not someone stationed near the disaster. This is just a farmer. So it goes to show how widespread this disaster actually was. Radiation didn't just stay, over there. Countries hundreds of miles away had to toss out crops, quarantine livestock, and deal with contaminated soil and water. In case you needed some visual proof of the Chernobyl exclusion zone still being very dangerous, look at this photo taken in Pripyat in 2017. Here we see a Geiger counter next to a metal claw, reading 679,000 counts per minute. To put that in perspective, a normal background radiation level is usually around 20 to 50 counts per minute. Even a level of a few thousand per minute is considered dangerous for short-term exposure. 679,000? That's off the charts. That's enough to kill someone in minutes if exposed directly. This claw isn't just contaminated, it is extremely radioactive. But what exactly is the claw, though? Here's a full view of it. The claw is a giant crane bucket, like a big mechanical scoop. It was used during the cleanup after Chernobyl to scoop up highly radioactive debris, things like graphite from the reactor core, concrete, and other fallout. After the cleanup, it was left in the forest near Pripyat, where it's now one of the most radioactive objects in the exclusion zone. Here we see a worker in full protective clothing and a mask handling boxes of vegetables in a landfill in Berlin. These vegetables had to be tossed because they were contaminated by radioactive fallout from Chernobyl. The crates are stacked on the ground and the workers sorting and moving them, making sure they're kept away from people. It's another photo that shows how far the disaster reached. The radioactive cloud traveled across Europe, landing on crops in other countries. Authorities had to act really fast, pulling food from stores, stopping it from being eaten, storing it in controlled landfills. Pictured here are Oksana Gaibon and Alla Kosmirka, both victims of the disaster, receiving infrared radiation treatment at the Terrera Children's Hospital in Havana, Cuba in 1994. Doctors experimented with infrared lamps to treat radiation burns on Chernobyl victims. The idea was to help damaged damaged skin heal faster using heat and light to, in theory, help stimulate blood flow and tissue repair. It was not a standard treatment, and it wasn't really proved to actually help anything. Doctors were just kind of trying anything they could. Most care focused on preventing infections, treating burns with dressings and medications, and in severe cases, bone marrow transplants. Along the Pripyat River, a whole line of boats was left behind after the evacuation. Some were small ferries that moved workers back and forth to the plant. Others were service boats used for hauling equipment or fuel. When the fallout hit, the boats were already exposed, so they were basically written off. There was no point trying to save them. They were contaminated, and the priority was, of course, clearing people, not equipment. So over time, they just sat rotting. Some stayed tied to their docks until the ropes gave way. Others drifted a little, got stuck in mud, or sank just enough that only the top half still sits above the water. You can walk along the shoreline and see them rusting in different stages, peeling paint, collapsed decks, broken windows, metal flaking off. One of the most recognizable is a sightseeing boat that used to take people on little cruises along the river. Now it's just sitting there, tilted on its side, slowly falling apart. And these eerie images are what are often called shadow people. You can find these black silhouettes painted all over the exclusion zone, on walls and stairwells, doorways. They were added years after the evacuation by artists visiting the site. The shapes show kids, adults, and workers, people who used to be everywhere before the city was abandoned. They're not memorials or official markers, but it does help fill the empty spaces left behind. It gives a sense of presence to the people who were forced to leave. They're a little eerie, but it does add this somber beauty to the place too. Here we see the red forest being cleaned up. The dead radioactive trees were cut down and soil was disturbed. Dust containing radioactive particles could easily get picked up by wind and then spread to other areas. So to help stop that, crews sprayed the cleared area with a special solution, basically a type of liquid that soaks into the soil and debris. The solution helps bind the radioactive particles together, keeping them from flying up into the air. It doesn't remove the radiation, but it reduces the risk of it spreading, at least. The red forest is the area right next to the Chernobyl reactor, where the explosion and fallout killed thousands of pine trees almost instantly, turning the needles this reddish brown. After the disaster, the forest became one of the most radioactive places on Earth. Cleanup crews had to go in wearing full protective gear, cutting down trees, raking contaminated soil, and burying it in trenches. The work was dangerous. Every piece of debris, every tree, every scoop of soil was just full of contamination. They used bulldozers and trucks to remove the dead trees and bury radioactive material, creating huge piles of waste covered with sand and concrete. And even decades later, this forest is still highly radioactive. And finally, in this photo, two liquidators are walking through a field inside the exclusion zone. They're wearing those bulky anti-chemical suits and pig muzzle masks. The suits look protective, but they didn't actually do much to shield them from the kind of radiation they were surrounded by. They're mostly meant to keep radioactive dust off their skin, not stop the radiation itself. They're holding these older style radiation counters, equipment that was already outdated by the time the accident happened. It, of course, wasn't ideal for measuring fast changing levels out in open fields, but it was all they had. Their job was to check the soil and the young plants to see how much contamination had settled there. Plants in the field weren't going to be harvested or eaten, of course. Scientists kept sections of land like this untouched so they could track how radiation was affecting the plants and soil over time. That's been the video for today. I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next one.